The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel cast dancing shadows across marble floors as Karim Al-Fayed's laughter echoed through the lobby. His diamond cufflinks caught the light as he gestured dismissively at the small girl standing before him. "I speak 9 languages," 7-year-old Lily had just declared. Her chin raised with quiet dignity. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Elizabeth Morrison, the hotel manager, stood frozen mid-step, her clipboard forgotten. David Miller's weathered hands tightened on his janitor's cart, knuckles white against worn metal. David Miller had been cleaning these floors for 3 years now, invisible to most who passed through the gleaming lobby. His navy uniform bore his name in simple white lettering, a far cry from the tweed jackets he'd once worn in university lecture halls. At 35, his shoulders carried more than just the weight of his mop bucket. They carried the dreams he'd set aside, the promises he'd made to a dying wife, and the fierce love for the remarkable little girl who now stood defending their dignity before one of the wealthiest men in the city. His calloused hands told stories of sacrifice that his daughter was too young to fully understand. Every late shift, every extra hour, every degrading comment from guests who saw only his uniform and not the man beneath it, all of it was for Lily. Lily Miller was no ordinary 7-year-old. While other children her age struggled with basic reading, she devoured books in multiple languages with the same enthusiasm they showed for Saturday morning cartoons. Her mind was a sponge that seemed to have no saturation point, absorbing linguistic patterns and cultural nuances with an ease that had once made her father's professor colleagues shake their heads in amazement. She had her mother's delicate features, the same honey-colored hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, the same emerald eyes that sparkled with intelligence. But she had her father's spirit, that quiet strength that refused to bend, even when the world seemed determined to break it. In her small frame lived a giant's courage, though she wielded it with the innocence only a child could possess. Karim Al-Fayed represented everything the Grand Metropolitan Hotel aspired to: attract wealth beyond measure, influence that opened doors across continents, and an appetite for luxury that kept the hotel's premium suites booked year-round. His 3-piece Armani suit cost more than David earned in 6 months. His watch alone could have paid for Lily's college education twice over. Born into Dubai's elite, educated at Oxford, and made richer through oil investments and tech ventures, Karim had long ago forgotten what it meant to be looked down upon. The world bent to his will, not the other way around. His presence in any room shifted its gravitational center, drawing attention and deference in equal measure. Elizabeth Morrison had managed the Grand Metropolitan for 5 years, navigating the delicate balance between serving the ultra-wealthy and maintaining dignity for her staff. At 42, she possessed the rare combination of iron resolve wrapped in silk diplomacy. Her tailored suits were always impeccable, her smile perfectly calibrated. But those who worked under her knew she never forgot a name, never ignored a struggle, and never let injustice pass without consequence. Though her interventions were often so subtle that those she corrected rarely realized they'd been maneuvered. She'd noticed David from his first day, recognized the intelligence behind his tired eyes, and had quietly ensured his shifts aligned with his daughter's school schedule whenever possible. The incident had begun innocently enough. Lily had accompanied her father to work that afternoon, a rare occurrence necessitated by a teacher's conference day at her school. She'd been sitting quietly in a corner of the lobby, her small form nearly hidden behind an enormous French dictionary she'd borrowed from the library, when a distinguished-looking couple had approached the concierge desk, speaking rapid French. The concierge, new and flustered, had been struggling to understand their request for specific dietary accommodations when Lily's clear voice had rung out across the marble expanse. "Excusez-moi, mais je peux vous aider," she'd said, her pronunciation so perfect that the French couple had turned in surprise. What followed was a 5-minute conversation that left the French couple charmed and the concierge relieved. Lily had not only translated their dietary requirements, but had also recommended a local French bakery that specialized in gluten-free pastries, information she'd absorbed from one of her father's late-night study sessions when he'd helped her explore French cuisine through language. The couple had been delighted, pressing a $20 bill into her small hand despite her protests, and had complimented David on raising such an exceptional child. It was this exchange that had drawn Kareem's attention from his position near the elevator banks. A janitor's child speaking French? Kareem's voice had dripped with amused condescension as he'd approached, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble like a countdown to confrontation. How wonderfully unlikely. Tell me, little one, did you memorize a few phrases to impress the tourists? A clever trick, I suppose. For earning tips. His smile held no warmth, only the sharp edge of someone who enjoyed highlighting the distance between his world and theirs. David had started forward, but Lily had placed a small hand on his arm, a gesture so adult in its restraint that it stopped him cold. I don't perform tricks, sir, Lily had responded, her voice steady despite the trembling David could feel through her fingers. I speak French because I love the way it sounds like music when you conjugate verbs properly. I speak it because my papa taught me that every language is a door to understanding people better. She'd paused, then added with the devastating honesty only children possess. And I speak 8 other languages too. 9 in total. The lobby had gone silent. Even the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers seemed to fade. Kareem's eyebrows had risen in mock surprise, his lips curving into a smile that promised humiliation. 9 languages? How extraordinary. And I suppose next you'll tell me you've written symphonies and solved mathematical theorems. He'd looked around, ensuring he had an audience for what he clearly expected to be an entertaining exposure of a child's fabrication. Very well, little polyglot. Let's test this claim of yours. Surely you won't mind demonstrating your remarkable abilities. Elizabeth had stepped forward then, her heels clicking with authority. Mr. Al-Fade, perhaps we could. But Kareem had waved her off with the casual dismissal of someone used to having his way. No, no, Miss Morrison. The child has made an extraordinary claim. Surely we should celebrate such talent if it exists. And if it doesn't, his pause was heavy with implication. Well, it's never too early to learn the consequences of dishonesty. Lily had straightened her shoulders, a gesture eerily reminiscent of her father when he'd once defended his doctoral thesis. Test me, she'd said simply. The 2 words carried no bravado, no fear, just the quiet confidence of someone stating a fact like the sun rises in the east. David's heart had broken and swelled, simultaneously broken that his child had to prove herself to someone so unworthy of her brilliance, swelled with pride at her courage. Kareem circled the small girl like a predator sizing up prey, his cologne leaving an expensive trail in the air. Let's begin with something simple, shall we? Since you've already demonstrated your French, let's try Arabic, my mother tongue. He rattled off a complex sentence in Arabic, his words flowing like water over stones, full of cultural idioms and formal constructions that even native speakers sometimes struggled with. The sentence he'd chosen was deliberately intricate, discussing the philosophical implications of generosity in Islamic tradition, peppered with classical references that would challenge university students. Without hesitation, Lily responded in Arabic, her voice taking on the melodic cadence of the language. She not only translated his sentence, but expanded upon it, referencing a poem by al-Mutanabi that spoke to the same theme. Her pronunciation was flawless, her grammar impeccable, and her cultural understanding evident in the respectful way she structured her response. The blood drained from Kareem's face as several Arab businessmen in the lobby turned to stare, their expressions shifting from amusement to amazement. A lucky guess, Karim said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Arabic is taught in many schools now. Let's try something more challenging, Italian. He switched languages seamlessly, speaking about the architectural history of Florence, using technical terms and historical references that would challenge even devoted students of Italian culture. His words were rapid, almost desperate, as if speed could trip up the small girl who stood calmly before him. Lily tilted her head slightly, a gesture she'd unconsciously adopted from her father when he considered a complex problem. Then she responded in Italian that sang with the rhythm of Tuscany, correcting a minor grammatical error Kareem had made while discussing the Duomo's construction and adding details about Brunelleschi's innovative techniques that she'd learned from an Italian documentary she'd watched with subtitles not to learn the language, but to understand the engineering. Her small hands gestured as she spoke, painting pictures in the air the way Italians did when language became art. The crowd that had gathered was no longer hiding their interest. Phones had appeared, though Elizabeth's stern glance kept them from recording. Hotel guests and staff alike formed a loose circle, their faces reflecting the same journey from skepticism to wonder. A Japanese businessman near the bar had set down his whiskey, leaning forward with intense interest. An elderly German couple had paused mid-conversation, their expressions shifting from annoyance at the disruption to fascination with the unfolding drama. "Japanese?" Karim demanded, his voice cracking slightly. He spoke about technological innovation, using business terminology and complex honorifics that revealed his own extensive education. But Lily matched him phrase for phrase, her Japanese flowing with the careful respect the language demanded, her use of particles precise, her understanding of context flawless. She even employed keigo, the formal register of Japanese, appropriately, something that took most foreigners years to master. Spanish. Karim's demand was sharper now, tinged with something close to panic. He spoke about global economics, using the subjunctive mood extensively, a grammatical construction that plagued Spanish learners worldwide. Lily's response was delivered in the crisp accent of Madrid, though she smoothly transitioned to a Mexican dialect when discussing agricultural exports, then to an Argentinian accent when mentioning Buenos Aires, demonstrating not just language proficiency, but regional awareness that spoke to deep, intuitive understanding. With each language, the crowd grew larger, their murmurs creating a symphony of amazement. David watched his daughter with tears threatening to spill, remembering nights when she was barely 4, curled against his side as he read to her in different languages, her little voice trying to mimic the sounds. He'd thought he was simply sharing his love of linguistics with her, never imagining she was absorbing it all like a desert absorbs rain. The memories flooded back uninvited as David watched his daughter stand tall before this arrogant man. He remembered the sterile hospital room where his wife Sarah had gripped his hand, her body ravaged by cancer, but her eyes still bright with love. "Promise me," she'd whispered, her voice paper-thin but steel strong. "Promise me you'll give her every opportunity to be extraordinary." He'd been 3 months away from defending his doctoral dissertation in comparative linguistics, 3 months from a tenure-track position at Columbia, 3 months from the life they'd planned together. But promises to dying wives carry more weight than dreams of academic glory. He'd withdrawn from the program the day after the funeral, sold their apartment, taken the first job that offered health insurance and stable hours. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel needed a janitor who could work evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it allowed him to be there every morning to walk Lily to school, every afternoon to help with homework, every weekend to take her to the library, where she devoured books in languages he'd taught her, and languages she'd somehow taught herself. His colleagues had called him crazy. His advisor had begged him to reconsider, offering extensions, assistantships, anything to keep one of his most promising students from throwing away his future. But David had looked at his 18-month-old daughter, Sarah's eyes staring back at him from that tiny face, and known that his future wasn't in lecture halls or academic journals. It was in bedtime stories told in 7 languages, in Saturday afternoons spent exploring etymology, in watching his little girl's face light up when she discovered that the Spanish word for library and the French word for bookstore shared the same Latin root. The sacrifice had been worth it, he told himself during the long nights when his back ached from mopping and his pride stung from the dismissive treatment of hotel guests. Worth it when Lily came home from kindergarten, excited to show him how she'd helped translate for a new student from Korea. Worth it when her first grade teacher had called, voice shaking with excitement, to tell him that Lily had tested at a 12th grade reading level in English and showed similar aptitude in the Spanish texts they'd tried. Worth it when she'd looked up at him last month and said, "Papa, languages are like puzzles, aren't they? And when you solve them, you get to talk to more people and understand more stories." But watching her now, having to prove herself to this man who saw them as less than human, David wondered if he'd failed her in some fundamental way. Should he have fought harder to stay in academia? To provide her with a different life, where her talents would be celebrated in university halls rather than tested in hotel lobbies? Should he have swallowed his pride and accepted his in-laws' offer of financial help, even though it came with strings that would have strangled his autonomy as a father? The doubts that plagued him at 3 in the morning, when he cleaned executive boardrooms, surfaced now, threatening to drown him. Enough. Elizabeth's voice cut through the demonstration like a blade through silk. She stepped into the center of the circle, her presence commanding instant attention. This remarkable young lady has demonstrated proficiency in French, Arabic, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish. Combined with her native English, that's 6 languages so far. She turned to face the crowd, her expression daring anyone to disagree. I've personally heard her speak Mandarin with our Chinese suppliers, Portuguese with the Brazilian embassy staff who dine here regularly, and German with the consul's wife last Christmas. The lobby erupted. Applause started slowly, initiated by the elderly German couple, then spread like wildfire through the gathered crowd. The Japanese businessman was nodding with deep respect, the kind reserved for true mastery. The French couple from earlier were beaming with vindication. Even the hotel staff, who'd tried to maintain professional invisibility, were clapping. The sound echoed off the marble walls, multiplied and magnified, until it felt like the entire building was celebrating this small girl who'd stood up to power and won. Kareem stood frozen in the center of it all, his face a study in conflicting emotions. The arrogance had drained away, replaced by something more complex: shame, certainly, but also a dawning recognition. His eyes moved from Lily to David, taking in the janitor's uniform with new understanding, then to Elizabeth, whose steady gaze held him accountable. The applause continued, and with each second, his carefully constructed superiority crumbled a little more. David moved to his daughter's side, his hand settling on her shoulder with infinite gentleness. Lily leaned into him slightly, and he could feel her trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "You did good, sweetheart," he whispered in Polish, a language he'd only taught her a handful of phrases in, a language his grandmother had spoken. "Jestem za ciebie dummy. I'm proud of you. Dziękuję. Tatusiu," she whispered back. "Thank you, Daddy." The crowd was beginning to disperse, but the energy in the air remained electric, charged with the kind of moment that would become hotel legend, told and retold with increasing embellishment. But David didn't care about any of that. He only cared about the little girl beside him, who just stood taller than any giant. The crowd had begun to disperse when Kareem's voice cut through the murmurs. "Wait." The single word carried a different tone now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. He approached David and Lily slowly, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Miller, is it?" He'd noticed the name tag, finally seeing the man rather than just the uniform. "Your daughter is extraordinary." David's arm tightened protectively around Lily's shoulders. He'd heard that tone before from wealthy parents at Lily's school, the ones who wanted to arrange playdates not for friendship but for what they called beneficial associations. But Kareem surprised him. The billionaire actually lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to Lily's eye level, a gesture that cost him more in pride than money ever could. "I owe you an apology, young lady," Kareem said, his voice carrying across the lobby. "I made assumptions based on prejudice rather than observation. That was wrong of me." He paused, seeming to struggle with words for the first time since he'd entered the hotel. "In my culture, we have a saying: the tree that would grow tall must sink deep roots. Your roots in language run deeper than many scholars I know." Lily studied him with those penetrating green eyes. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said simply. "Papa says the important thing is learning from them." The wisdom in her words, delivered with childlike sincerity, seemed to strike Kareem like a physical blow. Several people in the lingering crowd made soft sounds of appreciation. "Your papa sounds like a wise man," Kareem said, rising to face David. "Mr. Miller, I run an international education foundation. We sponsor exceptional children, providing them with opportunities to study at the finest institutions worldwide." He pulled out a business card that probably cost more to design than David earned in a day. "Your daughter could have her pick of schools, Switzerland, Singapore, anywhere that could nurture her gift." David felt the floor shift beneath him. Here it was, the opportunity he could never provide, handed to them by the very man who'd tried to humiliate them. He thought of Sarah, of his promise to give Lily every opportunity. But he also thought of bedtime stories and Saturday library trips, of morning walks to school and evening language games. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Al-Fayed." "It's not generosity," Kareem corrected. "It's investment. A mind, like your daughter's, shouldn't be limited by." He gestured vaguely, catching himself before saying something offensive. "Circumstances. She could study under the best linguists in the world, have access to native speakers, Cultural immersion programs. By the time she's 18, she could be speaking 20 languages, working for the UN, changing the world. Elizabeth watched David's face crumble and rebuild itself in real time. She'd seen that expression before, a parent torn between their child's potential and their heart's need to keep them close. Perhaps, she interjected smoothly, we could discuss this somewhere more private. My office is available, but Lily spoke first. Mr. Karim, she said, and everyone noticed she'd dropped the formal Al-Fayed, addressing him with the familiarity children reserved for people they'd decided to trust. Would I have to leave my papa? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karim blinked, clearly not expecting to negotiate with a 7-year-old. Well, the best programs are residential, but then no thank you, Lily said firmly. I'd rather speak 9 languages with my papa than 90 languages without him. She looked up at David, her expression fierce with love. Papa teaches me the most important language anyway, the language of love. That's not something you can learn in any school. David's tears finally spilled over. He knelt beside his daughter, pulling her into an embrace that said everything words in any language couldn't express. The crowd, which had been pretending to disperse while obviously eavesdropping, gave up all pretense. Someone was definitely crying. Possibly several someones. Elizabeth cleared her throat delicately. Mr. Al-Fayed, if I may suggest an alternative. She waited until she had everyone's attention. The foundation could sponsor Lily's education locally. New York has exceptional programs for gifted children. She could attend the UN International School, have private tutors, access to cultural centers and embassy programs, all while living at home with her father. She turned to David. And perhaps it's time the hotel reconsidered its staffing allocations. I've been proposing a guest relations position specifically for international VIPs. Someone with linguistic expertise would be invaluable. The salary would be significantly different from janitorial work. David stared at her, unable to process the sudden reversal of fortune. I don't have my doctorate. I never finished. Your daughter speaks 9 languages fluently at age 7, Elizabeth interrupted gently. I think that's qualification enough. She smiled, the first genuine warm smile anyone had seen from her all day. Besides, I've seen you reading Chomsky during your breaks. We both know you're overqualified for pushing a mop. Karim was watching this exchange with something approaching humility, an expression his face wasn't designed for. The foundation could cover the educational expenses, he said slowly, and provide a stipend for additional resources. No strings attached, no requirement to leave home. He met David's eyes. Consider it an investment in keeping families together while nurturing exceptional talent. The lobby had become completely still, everyone waiting for David's response. He looked down at Lily, who was gazing up at him with complete trust. He thought of Sarah, of promises made and sacrifices endured. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was just another form of love. We'll think about it, David said finally, his voice rough with emotion. It's a generous offer, and we're grateful for the opportunity. He stood, lifting Lily into his arms with the ease of long practice. But right now, I think my daughter and I need to go home and have dinner. Thursday is pizza night, and we never miss pizza night. Lily grinned, the first truly childlike expression she'd worn throughout the entire encounter. Can we get extra cheese, Papa? And practice Swahili? I found a book about it at the library. Swahili? Karim asked, startled. That would make 10 languages. Lily shrugged, suddenly shy. I like the way it sounds. Like drums and sunshine mixed together. The description was so perfectly 7 years old that it broke the remaining tension. Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm, appreciative, human. As David carried Lily toward the exit, Elizabeth fell into step beside them. The offer's real, she said quietly. Think about it. I'll have a formal proposal ready by Monday. She paused, then added even more quietly. You've raised an amazing daughter, David. Sarah would be so proud. David stopped, surprised she knew his wife's name. Elizabeth smiled. I pay attention to my staff. All of them. even the ones who think they're invisible. She touched Lily's hand gently, especially the ones raising multilingual prodigies while mopping floors. "Miss Elizabeth," Lily said suddenly, her voice carrying that tone children used when they just had a brilliant idea. "Do you like pizza? You could come with us. Papa always makes too much salad anyway, and he says eating alone makes food taste lonely." The invitation was delivered with such innocent sincerity that several people in the lobby made soft awe sounds. Elizabeth blinked, clearly caught off guard. She looked at David, who was trying to hide his embarrassment, while also, she noticed, not rescinding the invitation. "Well, please," Lily added, deploying the kind of smile that had probably been getting her extra story time since she could talk. "You stood up for us. Papa says we should always thank people who stand up for what's right. And you look tired. Papa says pizza makes everything better." "Your papa says a lot of wise things," Elizabeth said, her professional composure cracking to reveal something softer underneath. "I haven't had pizza in I can't remember how long." "Then you definitely need some," Lily declared with the authority of someone who considered pizza a fundamental human right. "We go to Antonio's. They have the best crust. And Mr. R. Pizza, Antonio lets me practice Italian with him. He says I sound like his grandmother from Sicily." David finally found his voice. "You're welcome to join us, Elizabeth. I mean, Miss Morrison, if you'd like." The invitation was awkward but genuine, the kind of gesture that came from recognition of shared humanity rather than social obligation. Elizabeth looked between father and daughter, these two people who'd just upended the normal order of the hotel's social hierarchy, who'd made a billionaire apologize, and a crowd of strangers applaud. "I'd like that," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." As they moved toward the exit together, Kareem called out one more time, "Mr. Miller." When David turned, the billionaire was standing alone in the middle of the lobby, looking somehow smaller than when he'd entered. "The offer stands. Whenever you're ready. No expiration date." He paused, then added, "And thank you for the lesson. It's been educational." David nodded, adjusting Lily's weight in his arms. "Everyone's always learning, Mr. Al-Fayed. That's what makes us human." He turned back to Elizabeth. "Ready?" The three of them walked out of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel together, leaving behind a lobby full of people who would talk about what they'd witnessed for years to come. The doorman, who'd watched the entire encounter, tipped his hat with unusual respect as they passed. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the city lights were just beginning to twinkle to life. "Papa," Lily said as they walked, her voice carrying the contentment of a child who knew she was loved. "Do you think Mr. Kareem will be okay? He looked sad when we left." David considered the question, appreciating his daughter's empathy even towards someone who'd tried to humiliate them. "I think he learned something important today, sweetheart. Sometimes the best teachers come in the smallest packages." "Like me?" Lily asked, grinning. "Exactly like you," David confirmed, kissing the top of her head. Elizabeth walked beside them, her heels clicking on the sidewalk in a rhythm that somehow complemented their pace perfectly. "You know," she said conversationally, "I studied Mandarin in college. I'm terribly rusty. But perhaps," she glanced at Lily, "perhaps I could practice with someone who wouldn't judge my terrible tones." Lily's face lit up like Times Square at New Year's. "Really? Oh, that would be wonderful. Mandarin is like singing. But you have to be careful because sometimes the same sound means completely different things depending on how you say it. Like ma can mean mother, or horse, or scold, or hemp. And once I accidentally told the delivery man his mother was a horse, and Papa had to explain." Her chatter continued as they walked toward Antonio's. Three people who'd started the day as barely connected strangers, and were ending it as something that might, with time and pizza and shared languages, become something more. Behind them, the Grand Metropolitan Hotel continued its elegant existence. But something had shifted in its atmosphere. The staff stood a little taller. The guests looked a little more carefully at the people serving them. And in his office later that evening, Karim Al-Fayed would make a phone call to his foundation, setting in motion a new program that would identify and support gifted children from working-class families, ensuring they could pursue their potential without sacrificing their childhood. But all of that was for later. Now, there was pizza to be eaten, Swahili to be explored, and the beginning of something that felt like hope. As they turned the corner, Lily was teaching Elizabeth how to say thank you in 9 different languages, her voice bright with the joy of sharing knowledge. David listened to his daughter's patient explanations, to Elizabeth's genuine attempts at pronunciation, and felt something in his chest that had been frozen since Sarah's death begin to thaw. "Papa," Lily said suddenly, switching to Korean, the 9th language she hadn't had a chance to demonstrate in the hotel. "I think Mama would like Miss Elizabeth. She's smart and kind, and she stood up for us." David's throat tightened, but he managed to respond in the same language. "I think you're right, little one. I think she would." Elizabeth looked between them, clearly recognizing the emotional weight of the moment, even without understanding the words. She didn't push, didn't ask for translation, just continued walking beside them, with a patience that spoke to her own understanding of grief and healing. The pizza shop's warm light spilled onto the sidewalk ahead of them, and through the window, they could see Antonio tossing dough with theatrical flair for a group of tourists. It was a simple neighborhood place, nothing fancy. The kind of restaurant that the Karim Al-Fayeds of the world would never notice. But it was theirs, part of the small, precious world David had built for his daughter, out of love and sacrifice, and the belief that dignity didn't require wealth. As they reached the door, Lily wriggled to be put down. She took David's hand in her right and, after a moment's hesitation, reached for Elizabeth's with her left. In Hawaiian, she announced, "Ohana means family. But it doesn't just mean blood family. It means nobody gets left behind or forgotten. I learned that from a movie, but I looked it up, and it's real." Elizabeth squeezed the small hand in hers, blinking rapidly. "That's beautiful, Lily. Languages are beautiful." Lily agreed matter-of-factly. "But people are better. That's what Papa always says. Languages are just the bridges we build to reach each other." They entered the restaurant together, the bell above the door chiming their arrival. Antonio looked up from his dough tossing, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw them. "David, Piccola Lily, and you bring a friend. Benvenuti, welcome, welcome." As they settled into their usual booth, with Elizabeth sliding in beside Lily and across from David, the evening took on the quality of something precious and fleeting, like catching fireflies in a jar. They would talk about school and work, about languages and dreams, about nothing and everything. Lily would demonstrate her Swahili progress, and Elizabeth would share stories from her own childhood attempts at language learning. David would watch them both, his daughter and this woman who'd stood up for them when it mattered, and allow himself to imagine a future different from the one he'd resigned himself to. Later, much later, after pizza and laughter and Lily falling asleep against Elizabeth's shoulder during the walk home, after David had carried his daughter up 3 flights of stairs to their small apartment and tucked her into bed, after Elizabeth had helped him clear the dishes and they'd stood together in his tiny kitchen, neither quite ready for the evening to end after all of that, they would stand at his door, and Elizabeth would say, "She's extraordinary, David, but so are you. Don't forget that." And David would think about sacrifice and love, about the languages we speak and the ones we feel, about bridges built and burned and built again. He would think about Sarah and promises and the way life sometimes circles back to give you a second chance at something you thought was lost forever. "Thank you," he would say, meaning for dinner, for standing up for them, for seeing them as more than their circumstances, for everything and nothing, and all the words that existed in the spaces between languages. Elizabeth would understand, because some things transcended translation. She would smile, touch his hand briefly, and say, "Monday. We'll talk properly on Monday. About the job, about Lily's education, about everything." The future would stretch ahead of them, full of possibility and complexity, of challenges that would test them and joys they couldn't yet imagine. Lily would indeed get her scholarship, but more importantly, she would get to keep her childhood, her father, and the simple pleasure of Thursday pizza nights. She would grow up to speak, not just 9 or 10, but eventually 15 languages. And she would use them all in service of connecting people, of building bridges, of making the world a little smaller and a lot kinder. But that was all to come. In this moment, in a small apartment above a dry cleaner's shop, a father stood by his daughter's bedside, watching her sleep with her hand curled around a book of Swahili phrases, and whispered a promise to a wife who couldn't hear. But somehow, he believed, still knew. I kept my promise, Sarah. She's extraordinary. And she's happy. And maybe, just maybe, we're going to be okay. Outside, New York City hummed its multilingual song Spanish from the bodega below, Mandarin from the restaurant next door, English and Arabic and Russian and a dozen other languages mixing in the streets like ingredients in the most complex and beautiful recipe ever created. It was a symphony of human connection, and somewhere in it, a 7-year-old girl who spoke 9 languages was dreaming in all of them, while her father finally allowed himself to dream too.